you might be hearing these numbers thinking, oh my God, like I've got to study 12 hours a day.
The worst ever day, I'd say worst, right? Because I did the most studying that day and I felt horrible afterwards. But I studied around 14 hours that day.
Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jeddle, and today I'm joined by a very, very special guest. We've got not only someone who just achieved a perfect ATAR of 99.95 in Jordan, but we also have someone who was a school captain. He topped the state in English Advanced, incredible achievement, 8th in the state in Extension 1 Maths as well. So Jordan, delighted to have you on here. Thank you so much for offering your advice. I'm sure everyone's going to be on the edge of their seats waiting to see what you say about how you studied, how you got through the year. But thanks very much for joining us and congratulations.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I think a good place to start would just be to go back. It must be a week or two now. We're doing this relatively soon after you got your results. I mean, you got one of your results before everyone else, right? Which was that you came first. If you come first in the subject, you actually find out a day before. First in English Advanced. What did that feel like when you found out? And like, how does that work? Do they give you a call? Do you have to, do something special in terms of preparing for like an interview, or you going to an award ceremony? Run us through that process.
So I think a couple of days before, it was on a Wednesday. It was on a Wednesday, right? So about on a Monday, I got a call about 9 a.m. from Nessa to expect another call in the afternoon from Prukar, the deputy premier. And so I think when I got that first call, a lot of stuff was just running through my mind. I was like, whoa, is this really true? Am I really going to get a first, right? And I'll be honest, I did not expect English to be the first I got, right? Because I was more of a maths and science person. So, well, I was waiting. I think I didn't do much the whole day just because I was really nervous and excited. And when I got called that afternoon, she told me I got first in the state for English, and it's a bit cliche, but I was speechless. I think I said a couple words, but okay, and I hung up from there. And I think we had to fill a form afterwards, but like maybe stories we could tell the media and stuff. And I was fortunate enough to be selected, and so I had to keep it a secret from everyone else. And I think that was the worst part of it, just trying not to tell anyone else. I think on Wednesday, the whole big reveal happened, and it was great. Yeah, I did not expect to do well in English, actually. It was one of the subjects I was like, oh, hopefully hopefully I pass, or hopefully I band 6 this.
Hopefully I pass and then I get like 100%.
Yeah, it was great, yeah.
So, such a fantastic story. And a couple of things, people are probably wondering, what mark gets first? Did you get 100 or is it 99? What mark gets it?
So if I split it up into like external, internal, right? Externally, I achieved a 99 out of 100. And internally, I actually achieved a 98.
Okay, so were you ranked first? My suspicion was you weren't ranked first then internally at your school.
Funnily enough, I was ranked third in my school, actually. There was 2 people tied first and I was third. Yeah, but the difference in the marks wasn't that much, so I guess internally it wasn't too much of a difference.
Absolutely, because people are probably wondering, how could you be third internally and still get first in the whole state? But the first thing to note is the ranks are essentially based on the exam that everyone does, right? The final exam. So you had the best final exam performance, and then sometimes your internal rank comes into play if people are on the same exam mark. But as you say, if you are coming third, but you're basically on the same mark as someone first, it's looked at in a very similar way.
Yeah, and I think it actually comes down to just having the whole grade performance do really well. I think that's what kind of separated North Sydney boys this year as well. Everyone actually worked together after our trial exam, which is actually our third assessment, not our fourth. And it boosted everyone's marks to like even higher. And I think that helped, I guess, cover that ground that I was not first in English. I was third. But because everyone else put in the effort, everyone else did really well. My internal mark was really good in the end. So HSC is not really, I guess, a single race. It's more like a group race. I'll be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, explain that a little bit further if you can. Like, how were you informed about how that would work? Like, why is it beneficial to help the other people in your year group?
So what happens is you're not assigned the mark based on the rank, but rather the standard deviation, right? So what happens is Nessa will have that top mark, have that bottom mark, and have that median mark. And where you are in respects to the median, they'll give you an internal mark that's suitable. So if you have, let's say, a grade with a really high median, you're a lot higher than the median, then you'll get a really good internal mark. So it's actually really dependent on how your grade does.
So you're playing this kind of funny game where you want to maximize your internal rank, so it is naturally a little bit, well, probably in your case, you can tell us, very competitive up until the end of trials. And then you want to collaborate with everyone and you want to help everyone else once you've locked in your rank, because essentially in the final exams, if everyone else does well, then your assessment mark is likely to be a lot higher. Is that right, in terms of the mentality before trials and after trials?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny mentality, I guess, where you're a bit selfish near the start, but then you come really altruistic near the end. And I think it's a bit natural, considering it's like the HSC is kind of, you kind of treat it as like a game, right? Where you need to maximize your points. But that kind of help was more localized, where we helped in our own friend groups, right? And then we kind of spread it to everyone else after the trial. So it was something we were doing kind of near the start, but not to like that extent.
Makes complete sense. Now, something I want to tap into here, there are a couple of really interesting stories. One is something I was reading is your background, right? So were you born in Australia or parents born? What's the story in your background? Because you came first in English and you were saying, I wasn't expecting to come first in English out of the whole state. So tens of thousands of people. What's your background and why did you not feel as comfortable with English? Because I think that there's something amazing behind that, and I'd love you to kind of share it with everyone.
So my parents were born in Vietnam, in a place called Da Nang, and they came to Australia in about 1993. When they came to Australia, they didn't know any English. My parents had to learn through like CDs and Sony Walkmans for people who guess know. And so I grew up and I didn't really learn English properly until I entered kindergarten in school. And so I only grew up, and I still do, I only speak Vietnamese at home. English was not really something I focused on. A lot of Asian mentality is like, oh, English is not important, you should just do math and science. And I think that really continued until year 11. For people who do selective tests, I got like 12 or 13 out of 20 in the writing section. That was, I think, the worst performance I've ever had. But I guess this really means a lot because I was able to overcome that sort of barrier. My teacher knows. My vocabulary is not the greatest. I don't know many fancy words or, I guess, polysyllabic words and stuff. So that was really surprising to me. Yeah.
So like that's incredible. It's not even your primary language in terms of what you speak at home. You learnt it only properly, from the age of say 6 onwards. How do you go from being in that position to topping the state in English? Like, what were the key things that driving you and helping you to achieve that level of excellence in the subject?
So English, even though it is really subjective and there's that notion around it being like, oh, you have to sound really sophisticated and sound really fancy. But if you boil it all down, I think it's all about like pushing a point. That's what I discovered in year 11 and 12, is that English is not about how fancy you sound, because that can actually make it a lot worse. You can make it a lot more convoluted, but rather how clear you are in presenting a good message in a good way of answering the question. And just like kind of the HSC, I kind of treated English as like a game. I kind of found formulas, right, for certain topics like short answer questions. And even with essays, I had like a little set routine. And that really helped me as someone who was coming from that sort of average level English to becoming a higher level. And I think that was really important. But also overcoming my fear of feedback. I think a lot of my friends also have the same kind of fear where they don't want to get feedback on their essays. And for me, I remember a funny story. There was this guy in year 10. He would always want to give feedback on my essay. He was really nice for that reason, but I was scared of him. I didn't want to hear that because it's kind of the truth about what I wrote. But then I realized like it's not really that important. All he wants to do is make you actually perform better. So overcoming that fear was something I found changed my whole perspective on English. Just trying to improve.
Wow, so the ego can really get in the way of improving your marks because you don't want to hear that you can improve or you can be better, because no one wants to hear a criticism about their work, even if it's implicit. Someone might not tell you it's bad, but they might say, hey, you could do this or this better. But there is a part of all of us, I think, and it speaks to what you're saying, that doesn't want to hear it because it's too proud. But you actually had the humility, or at least it sounds like you learnt the humility to receive that feedback, and you're saying that kind of took you to another level. And you also talked about localized or small groups of peer feedback, it sounds like, in terms of year 12. So tell us a bit about that. Tell us how the feedback process looked leading up to the end of trials in terms of how you were getting feedback and what was the most useful feedback for you.
So I think I'm pretty happy that you mentioned about humility and stuff. I think the ego is something that does get in the way. And I really only learnt the hard way in like year 6 and year 10, where I was humbled quite a lot. And I think in terms of feedback, it really starts because I had a wonderful teacher. I was able to always ask him for feedback, and he was amazing. I think he always saw there was always some sort of improvement in my essay, and in the end as well, he also reaffirmed that my essay was good enough to ace certain questions, and so that sort of feedback was really valuable. But also in my friend circle, we always shared around essays, or people in my class, people I was sitting next to, we would exchange the essays during class time, see whether this evaluation was good or if this paragraph topic sentence was good. I like to take it step by step, and so when I do write something, I always like to have immediate feedback, because let's say I write a paragraph and I come back to the start, it was a bit off-putting for me, and so that's something I continued. Funnily enough, closer towards trials, I asked more and more people for feedback. I was more and more open to sharing what I wrote with other people, and I think that really helped because I saw so many different other perspectives, the way people wrote, and that kind of informed me. I think, to put it simply, I got inspiration from what they wrote. We had this great server, and I think there's still a couple messages here and there even now, but all the top rankers shared all their essays. So me and the top 10, we all put in our essays and gave it to the people, even towards the bottom as well, to help improve their essay. And we gave feedback on their questions.
I want to go back to the start of the year when you were school captain. I read a great story about a speech you gave, and then can you just take us through that moment at the start of year 12 and then the story at the end of year 12 when you guys found out you came first?
Yeah, so I think the night before I was thinking, what should I put in my speech to make it memorable, right? I wanted to leave an impact sort of, and there was this message in the back of my head of, we want to be number one this year. That's continued kind of from year 7. It's been sort of a goal for me personally that I've had since year 7, but I didn't really have the platform to say it. So I thought maybe I can use this opportunity to put that goal out there. And I think it definitely left an impression on many people's mind. Funnily enough, I remember afterwards, a lot of my friends were like, "Oh, stop lying," or funny joke, right? But I think I was always confident in that goal. I never wavered from it. And so throughout the year, it's something that people kind of hopped onto. They kind of believed in it as well. And that motivated them to work harder, actually. And I think it is one of my greatest achievements that we came first in the state. Not because I succeeded, but I pushed other people to work hard and I inspired other people as well. And I think that the fact that people didn't really believe in us motivated us to work harder as well. The fact that they didn't think we had anything special, but us as a cohort, we all believed in each other. And I think that brings back to that collaborative effort.
So what exactly did you say? This is your acceptance speech or your first speech as school captain. Do you remember what exactly you said around, achieving this goal? And then can you tie that to where you were when you guys found out you were first in the state?
It was at the very end of the speech. I think I had this line. It was like, I have one mission that I want to achieve, and it is that we'll be number one in the state this year. And the whole hall erupted. And I think that sort of celebration happened as well on the Thursday when the news was released. We actually had no idea what was happening. He just said, "Oh, there might be some media coming for some morning tea." Right, but people had our suspicions. We thought that there was some big news. When he said it, I think a lot of people have seen the video online. We all just jumped up in joy. I think even the people that weren't there were really happy as well.
Yeah, it's just an amazing story that you kind of were on the front foot there. First speech, set a mission, set a goal for everyone, helped facilitate that throughout the year through a lot of sharing of responses. And it does sound like English was really a driving force behind that. English is always something that correlates with an overall rank for a school because everyone has to do English. And if you do well at English, it scales incredibly well. So to come kind of first in English and then first as a whole school, due to that collaborative effort, is something, I think we can all take something away from. Was there anything else personally or as a group that you think helped bolster those English marks for you?
So I think the collaborative effort was not actually our original idea. It was the year above. They sort of started this, oh, we should all collaborate together instead of hiding it within our small friend groups. And we saw the results that came from that. I think we got around 100 or 120 band sixes in English last year, which was phenomenal, right? So we thought maybe this strategy actually really works. And when we kind of took it on, we saw that it did improve a lot of people's marks. And so I found that our grade was a grade that actually all welcomed each other. We were fortunate enough to have this group of people, even across 158 boys, that we all wanted to help each other. And I think that really culminated into our success. Even though selective is sort of maybe a luck of the draw who gets into what school, we were fortunate enough to have this grade where maybe not everyone was the highest selective mark, but everyone wanted to help each other. I guess that just shows that it is the hard work that people have put in from year 7 to 12, or even from year 10 to 12, that really did contribute to our success.
Absolutely. And on a personal level, when we talk about hard work, run us through what year 12 looked like for you individually. Like, we know you're collaborating as a year if we zoom out, but what's that day-to-day grind look like for you? How many hours are you studying? How are you structuring a typical weekday when you're at school?
I actually live quite far away from North Sydney boys. I live in Western Sydney, right? So it takes me about an hour and a half one way to get to school. And so I realized around early year 11 that I could use this time to maybe study a little bit, right? And so I think every morning I always have something planned out to study or do work on. In class, there were moments where I did slack off a bit, or I did just want to have fun, but most of the time I did spend listening to the teacher or getting feedback from the teacher or trying to get a main message from it. During recess and lunches, I don't think I can stress the importance of just having a break during recess. Don't study all the time, you'll burn out. But I think during recess, when we all hung out, we all did stupid things together and we all studied together, but it was more of a casual study, right? We didn't really stress too much about getting the most work done. In terms of the way home, went to the gym a lot during year 11 and 12. But in year 12, I went around 3 to 4 times a week, maybe an hour and a bit each session, right? And keeping myself more busy with those extracurriculars, right? Not just going to the gym. I felt that actually made me more productive instead of spending all that time studying. I didn't procrastinate, right? And so after I did that, I got into the mindset of, well, I had my fun. I did socialize with my friends during that exercising session. Now it's time for me to study. And so I had this to-do list, right? I think to-do list is actually one of the best things you could have. And with that, ticked off everything I needed to do. And it was just study for the rest of the night.
Yeah, so you made a to-do list. Run us through the moment you got home. Like, if you've gone to the gym after maybe it's 5:30, 6 o'clock, how many hours are you studying for and how many subjects would you typically tick off if we're just thinking about an ordinary day?
I'm a firm believer that you can't do all 5, 6, 7 subjects all in one night. It's just impossible. And so I actually blocked it in sort of what my to-do list needed to do. So that was kind of like phase 1-ish. And then phase 2-ish was what other work could I do throughout the week, right? So at the end of each week, I would always look back and see how much time did I spend on each subject or how much work did I do for each subject. And I would make changes according to that.
Yeah, there's a nice combination of things there, but it also sounds like with the to-do list, you were actually very organized and methodical about the way you did it. So at the end of the week, you're actually recalibrating and making sure you haven't neglected any particular subject. So I think there's a lot of great things there. Is there anything else you want to add in terms of that structure that you had set up?
Sometimes, let's say I did biology and chemistry during my urgent tasks in the to-do list. In that extra time, I would do a completely different subject, maybe English or maths. And most nights, actually, I record I'm only doing maybe one subject or one unit, and then the next night I'll do the other. And so that kind of helped balance that sort of short study sessions on one subject and also, I guess, longer, more extended periods of study on that subject. And I use the to-do list app called Todoist. That is super organized and has so many functions and stuff. So it actually really helped with organizing all my thoughts, because I was school captain as well. There was a lot of, I guess, sort of extracurricular tasks I needed to do. And so I think people call it the second brain. that sort of technique was really helpful.
All right, so make sure you guys check out that app, or worst case, just do the old handwritten to-do list or get some kind of spreadsheet going. But that's awesome. I also love the point you made about how by keeping busy, you were more productive. What people say, a common thing is, if you want something done, give it to someone who's busy, because there's this idea of positive momentum. And if you're in the momentum, if you're in the flow of doing things, it doesn't really matter what it is. It's exercise, socializing, studying, doing leadership activities. You're in that right kind of momentum to get things done. Whereas if you're constantly having breaks and you have too much free time, you actually have that inertia and you find it harder to start things. So I think that's a really important point, especially for people who are looking to improve their marks. Try and keep yourself busy. Don't burn yourself out, of course. Busy also means scheduling in time to relax, ironically. But it sounds like you just had a schedule there, and it included exercise and socializing, which is really important. What about when we look at the days before the HSC and you might not have had school, or it was a holiday period before trials? How many hours were you studying there? I mean, people would be curious to know. And how were you structuring that day in terms of how many subjects you were covering and what order were you doing it? Like, what was your general system there?
So, like I said before, I think I always aim for 8 hours. So I always blocked out 8 hours of sleep, right? I had a set sleep time and a set wake up time, because I think that routine was really important in making me still be productive during those, I guess, StuVac times or holiday times, right? We had this group timer thing called YPT, where we track each other's study time, and I guess it's sort of a mini competition of who can study the longest. And so I think I went to the library at around 8 a.m. and I stayed there until closing time, 9 p.m. Right? But I had about an hour break for lunch, and also I guess an hour break for exercising as well in the middle. I think overall the worst ever day, I'd say worst, right? Because I did the most studying that day and I felt horrible afterwards. But I studied around 14 hours that day.
Wow.
In a way. But I counted sort of the memorizing English while I was on transport. But I averaged around 10 and 11-ish, which it is quite a lot. But I think during those periods of time, just before trials or just before HSC, it is something I don't recommend you do for long times. I could never live with that. But my Google Calendar is actually like, I think I had like specific colors, and I blocked it all off into sort of 3 specific study sessions. So one morning, one afternoon, one evening. That's how I sort of blocked my day. And before I go to sleep, I would have that sort of time where I set tomorrow's schedule, right? And so when I did get to the library, I didn't waste any time. And I think that really helps with also English, right? A lot of people don't like doing English. It is a subject that it's sort of like, I kind of can't be bothered doing. And so by setting that schedule for tomorrow morning, even when you wake up and you don't feel like doing it, it's sort of, I already said it yesterday, I shouldn't go back on it.
That's great advice. I think scheduling ahead of time is absolutely key. And doing things the night before, you can actually schedule things out weeks ahead of time, even when you're preparing for, trials or the HSC or anything else. But at least doing it the night before gives you that motivation that you definitely will need sometimes to just get up and start going, even if you don't feel like doing it. By having that, you've mentally prepared yourself for success the next day. So I think that's really key. And for everyone watching, you might be hearing these numbers thinking, oh my God, like I've got to study 12 hours a day. Well, you don't. It's all about what your goals are and how motivated you are. I mean, this is someone who achieved 99.95. This is the top tier. This is top 50 people in the whole state. So you need to look at this, and I hope everyone watching it is taking from it that, hey, I'll apply this to my threshold and my goals. So if my goal is to get above a 90 ATAR, then maybe I have to do 6 hours a day in that most intensive period. But you can still use all of these tactics and strategies along the way. Are there any other general strategies or tips you'd give to students who are going through the HSC or just approaching year 12 in general?
I think it's actually great that you brought up that point about what your goals and motivations are, right? So I had a really hard goal, and I guess that had a really strong motivation on why I could be studying so many hours. And I think the key takeaway is not the numbers or the stats that I kind of put out, but rather the concepts surrounding it, right? So being sort of that organized. And I think that applies to even sports as well. Maybe if you're training for something, that could help. Even though I said I blocked it off the night before, right, on the calendar, I left a lot of room for malleability. I tried study timetables once before with subject timetables, right? And I found that didn't really work because it was really inflexible. Let's say I just did an hour of maths and I kind of got into the groove of it, but now I've got to switch to chemistry. I think that kind of ruined the flow. And so you just sort of leave a lot of room for unexpected events as well. Maybe your car broke down, or maybe you took too long getting lunch, or you met up with a friend, right? Be structured and also be flexible, even though they're kind of conflicting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to clarify a couple of things, because I heard you say, you were memorizing. People always ask, oh, should you memorize your essays for English? And like, we just want to know the truth of it. I mean, a lot of people say they do. Some say they just do a lot of practice. What was your process there? Did you memorize things word for word? And what exactly were you memorizing for English when you were preparing for the final exam?
I think memorizing an essay is something that I did, and I still stand by it. The word for word part is something that you need to be a bit careful about. And so for English, if you for the people who do have my essay, my friends and stuff, you can see that there's a lot of blank spaces. You still need to tackle the question very explicitly, because my teacher was telling me, always, always, always answer the question in some way, shape, or form. And I guess so it's sort of mix of both, creating something on the spot and having that pre-prepared essay. I know some people who made an essay on the spot, and that's amazing because I don't think I could ever do that. But even Motsi, where I memorized 2-3-ish creative, I still left a lot of room for malleability. It's sort of having a one-size-fits-all.
So you would say it helps to have a one-size-fits-all for each module, but you need to factor in all of the spaces and just the mindset of adapting to new questions and practice those new questions.
Yeah, 100%. I think that one size fits all, it takes a lot of mental burden and stress off your mind when you are doing this exam, because you can walk into the exam hall really confident that you have something you can kind of spit out. But that sort of space where you have left, you do leave blank. When you practice, it does really help with creating insight on the spot. I think that was really valuable for me when I was practicing as well, trying to create sort of insight, maybe something out of nothing.
And did you time those essays to make sure you were going to have enough time to adapt and mold it to the question?
So when I did write out my essays and practice timing, I actually always did it to a new question. I practiced and kept on practicing and maybe cut down certain parts to make sure I had enough time to adapt and be flexible. Funny story is I always write until the very last second. I don't go back and check, right? And that kind of boils down to being conscious of what you're writing and conscious of what your ideas are presenting during your when you write your essay. I think if you pre-prepare something and write it word for word, you're not really conscious of maybe if you're tackling the question now. But if you leave those blank spaces in your mind, you'll subconsciously think, oh wait, what am I supposed to write here? And then you write something according to the question. That kind of cut down on the editing time. I actually found that I didn't really need time to go back and edit. And for people who know me, my handwriting is sort of atrocious, right? It got better closer towards HSC, and so it's a sort of a delicate balance between everything.
Did you type up those core drafts for each essay?
I typed up my initial draft, but I always made the final draft on paper. So I would print them out and I would make annotations, because when I was memorizing them, when I read it out loud, I realized there were maybe certain nuances or maybe certain phrases that didn't really work well, mesh well with the entire flow and clarity of the piece. So I would make those annotations on there.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So you kind of type it out, but read it out loud and then write it down to really figure out what bits need improvement and what doesn't. Because it sometimes it looks like you've got a perfect draft if it's typed out, but until you say it out loud to yourself and try writing it out and adapting it to other questions, you might not actually realize that there are some kind of weaknesses in the essay that could be improved. So I think that's really good practical advice. One question of interest, what do you think on average? It does depend on someone's speed of writing. So for those listening, just take this with a grain of salt. I'm just personally curious. How many words do you think on average your essays were?
My English teacher said to always aim high, and so I guess that I can kind of attribute my bad handwriting to that. So my common mod essay, I think, was around 1,300 words. So my core was around 1,200. Maybe sort of small sentences or links that I added on, maybe 1,300, 1,350. So it was quite a lot, but I tried to balance the handwriting aspect.
How many body paragraphs did you have in that essay?
In the common mod essay, 3 paragraphs.
So they're quite chunky, full of how many pieces of evidence do you think you used per paragraph?
It it was more of not evidence, but more of evaluations. I had three core evaluations or three lines of argument, and within those, I kind of blended sort of evidence together, right? So maybe some evaluations had two pieces of evidence because they kind of worked well together, and maybe some had one. But in terms of evidence, most of the time I didn't use the entire evidence section. I only used a couple words maybe, or maybe filtered it throughout the evaluation to make it kind of mesh well and seem more dynamic or fluid. That's also a pretty good piece of advice as well, to not kind of block off your evidence.
Yeah, so try and chop up your quotes into smaller pieces and integrate them into the sentence. Is that an example of what you're saying? Rather than just having a long quote with a technique and that's one whole sentence. Try and mesh it together by using smaller pieces of things.
Yeah, I think both are appropriate, but I think it's good to mix it up that way, right? Because when your markers do read your essays, they're reading maybe 1,000 essays to mark, right? You want to mix it up and make it seem somewhat interesting and you're engaging with the question. Definitely chop it up, mix it up. But also, if you do decide to stick to that one sentence, you want to make it so that it flows really well. When you read a paragraph, you don't want it to be too obvious that it's, oh, this is my first evaluation, it's my second evaluation, it's my third. But rather it sort of blends together and sort of it's like a miniature narrative in itself.
That makes sense. So you'll kind of tell in a conceptual story, sometimes I say. You're telling a story of ideas and they flow naturally and organically. They follow naturally one after the other.
Maybe if I put an example for people doing Merchant of Venice, I had this paragraph where I was analyzing Shylock as a character. So the first evaluation I'll talk about how he is perceived normally by everyone else, to put it simply, perceived by everyone else. And then secondly, I would say sort of this revisionist reading or analyzing Shylock as a contemporary reader. And then thirdly, I would tie those two together and tie in the human experiences, which is the rubric, right? And that was sort of the flow I kind of made.
And you had a supporting piece of evidence roughly for each of those?
Piece of evidence, or maybe this is more applicable to T.S. Eliot, but evidence that I could substitute in and out. But I always had this set of evidence that was my go-to, and that was the ones I was confident in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you've got go-to evidence, but sometimes you would have additional pieces of evidence that you could call upon if the question demanded?
Yeah, if it was more suitable for the question, wanted you to talk about the human experience of maybe love or conflict, maybe I could substitute out certain pieces of evidence to better answer the question, because that's ultimately what would change your essay. I think I remember my teacher saying, if you write an essay but you don't really answer the question, you're kind of limited to a 16, 17 out of 20. There's really, even if you write the best piece in existence, but you don't tackle the question well enough, you're really capped at 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, that's great advice. Anything else before we kind of tie things up here that you want a message that you want to give to students watching this, whether it's about study tips or otherwise?
So I think with English as well, it's sort of creating a message, right? That's what your essay is about. And I think that kind of simplifies enough for people to understand. And also with evaluation, it kind of clicked in my mind when my teacher told me, it was when you write something, you want to provide insight in a sense. Even if people have said it before, as long as you're providing insight on a certain piece of evidence or message, it works out really well for the markers. Like, let's say, instead of describing what happened contextually in that evidence or in that period, you would also accompany it with what does this imply, or what kind of message is this author trying to frame, or what does it reveal to us? And tying into that as well, it's also using that rubric as a guide. It's really hard to oversaturate your essay with rubric terms in a sense. And I think it's important to show that you're directly engaging with the rubric that they gave you. I remember before we did any essay or did any topic, we would go through the rubric, would highlight the key terms and make sure those key terms were in our essay. Just one last piece of advice is, even though people might not be bothered to, you should probably read the texts you're analyzing as well. Even if you don't like it, if you just skim through it, you'll probably gain greater holistic understanding of what the text is trying to present, and that can inform what your direction your essay is heading towards.
Well, that's great advice. Last question from me, personal one. Did you say, so you're familiar with Jeddle, or did you come across Jeddle in your time as a student?
I think I used Jeddle a couple of times for some English stuff back in year 9, 10-ish, and I thought it was pretty interesting. And I think one of the people I knew also came on Jeddle as well, called Jack Coleman. And actually, I quite liked the shorter videos, so I was quite I was quite surprised and happy that you reached out.
Of course. Well, I'm really glad I did as well. You've been really generous with your time and insights. So thank you very much, Jordan, for coming on here, sharing that with everyone. For everyone watching, I hope you appreciate what this man's just delivered. I mean, really inspiring as well. A lot of humility and hard work. That's very much apparent. So thank you very much, Jordan, for sharing that with us today. For everyone watching, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment if you enjoyed, spread the word, and see you in the next one.